We are so excited to have Ian Thomas here to talk to us about near-term strategies on how to get more people walking, especially getting kids walking to school, and how that can lead to long-term transformation. We're doing this in partnership with the Idaho Walk Bike Alliance and their program of silver linings that came out of the COVID. And so I am going to turn it over at this point to Cynthia Gibson, the Executive Director of IWBA, and let her introduce Ian.
Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate that. And what an honor it is to be a part of this Safe Routes convening that Elaine put together. And it's amazing to introduce somebody who I really admire, which is Ian. So I'm going to go ahead and give a little background on Ian. And I met him through America Walks. He is the state and local program director with America Walks. He develops and delivers education programs to advocates and professionals and elected officials about the benefits of walkable communities. His knowledge is vast. Ian was the founding executive director of the PedNet Coalition of Columbia, Missouri from 2000 to 2013. And while he was there, he developed one of the largest walking school bus programs in the country. And he coordinated a campaign that led to Columbia adopting the first complete streets policy in Missouri. And he was also very instrumental in reducing neighborhood speed limits. So Ian is on the Columbia City Council. He's been on the council since 2013, and he has spearheaded the creation and adoption of Columbia's Vision Zero policy. So Ian, we are excited to hear what you have to say today. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Cynthia and Elaine and Sarah. It's a pleasure to participate in this online Safe Routes to School convening in Idaho. And I just want to compliment you all as a state because within the national walking movement, there is a lot more activity, energy, really good work going on per capita in Idaho than almost any other state, I would guess, because there are so many of you that I've worked with, and I know you're doing wonderful work. And Gordon, it's great to see you again. Gordon was a Walking College Fellow several years ago, and I'll be talking a little more about that. Cynthia, you were also a Walking College Fellow. Elaine, you and I have worked together for many years, both elected officials. And then another person who springs to mind is Molly O'Reilly, who I heard from yesterday, and she mentioned she's not going to be able to join the convening today, but she was a board member with America Walks for many years, a Walking College mentor, and has contributed so much to the national walking movement. So you all in Idaho are doing great work, and hope you can keep it up. So I'm going to talk about near-term strategies in the time of the pandemic and respond to Elaine's challenge to think about how Safe Routes to School can really trigger a long-term transformation in behavior. And behavior depends on the environment people, live, work, and play in. So it's really important to think about the design of walkable communities. If we really want to get, 50, 75, 80, 90% of kids walking or biking to school, if that's our long-term vision. So as part of that, I am going to relate three stories of transformation, which I think are all applicable to different parts of Idaho. One from St. Louis, one from Batesville, Arkansas, and the third one from my hometown of Columbia, Missouri. Prior to that, as I mentioned, we're going to look at some short-term strategies, some things as you are right now, dealing with the uncertainty about whether kids are going to go back to school or not, and how can you implement a Safe Routes to School program into those circumstances. But first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit about America Walks. We are a national education and advocacy organization focused on increasing walking and expanding walkable communities all across the United States. Our main strategy really is communication. We have a very robust communication program. See here, we have a total of 41,000 people on our mailing list, receiving our newsletters, participating in our social media conversations, attending our webinars, and participating in things like the Walking College. And the thing that I'm excited about as being part of the walking movement is that this number was only about 10,000 as recently as 5 or 6 years ago. So Americans are increasingly becoming aware of the value of walking and the concept of walkability, and the fact that ordinary people in their own neighborhoods and in their own communities all across the country can really make a difference. So we do our work in 2 ways. We support, promote walking events through communications and partnerships, and we also do the hard work and train people to do the hard work of policy advocacy, because that's what it's going to take in the long run. We need to change the built environment if we're going to see people walking for large percentages of their trips. And to do that, we need to change policy, systems, and funding to emphasize the benefits of walking and walkability. And we see these 2 things. I want to just pause and check. Elaine, are my slides advancing?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, okay, good. I once did a presentation. I got about 15 minutes in, and somebody said, Ian, are we supposed to be looking at a different slide? And for some reason, even though I'd been advancing them on my computer, they were not advancing over the Zoom. So glad to know that. So this sort of shows our logic model. We support and promote and encourage people to get out and walk. And then we use that connection to build people's capacity to be advocates and to work on the second half of the model, the walkability piece, policy, public funding priorities, and infrastructure, to then create more safe spaces, enjoyable places for people to walk and move. In 2015, we worked closely with the Office of the Surgeon General to develop his call to action on walking and walkable communities. The Surgeon General was Dr. Vivek Murthy at the time, and he did a wonderful job of promoting this as a national priority there, because we really believe that that one is crucial. We're not going to get people to walk in large numbers till we redesign the environment in which people are walking. So that's going to be a theme of this talk. So really quickly, we have a lot of programs that we deliver. Our webinar series, it's really, I like to say it was a monthly webinar series, but it's at least twice monthly at the moment as we're in the shutdown. Some of our in-person activities are not happening, but we're kicking up the webinar series. The Walking College I mentioned earlier, this is a 6-month, always has been an online training program. So interestingly, as we're in this pandemic time, it really hasn't changed at all. Every year we recruit about 25 fellows through an application process. The last couple of times we've had over 100 applicants, so we sort that through that. The 25 fellows then take part in a sort of a 6-module training, which lasts from about May to September. In a normal year, we bring everybody together at the end of the course for an in-person workshop, and usually at an existing national conference. And then everybody, the final project is to create their walking action plan. And Gordon and Cynthia have both done that and have been working to implement their action plans. And we track how people are progressing through their action plans. And in many cases, those action plans change, as all plans are dynamic documents and should change when circumstances indicate that that's the correct thing to do. We do facilitate state collaborative workshops in which we work with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Health in a given state to identify common priorities between those 2 departments around the design of communities. making walkable communities for safety and health and local economic development and quality of life and a range of other priorities, and invite to those workshops often other state agencies, non-government organizations such as the statewide Bike Ped organization. If we were to do one in Idaho, then the Idaho Walk Bike Alliance and Idaho Smart Growth would certainly be among the very first organizations we talk to, along with the Idaho DOT and DOH. And then we often have locals at these workshops as well, and develop an action plan for the state to emphasize walkable community design going forward. And it's amazing what can happen when a DOT and a DOH get together and work collaboratively. We hold periodically national walking summits. The last one was literally as the country was shutting down, and we very nearly canceled it. It was in St. Louis, Missouri on March 10th and 11th. In the end, we made the decision just 4 days before it started that we would go ahead. Things were starting to shut down, and I think we lost about 1/3 of our registrants. We had social distancing rules for the conference, lots of alcohol wipes, and no hugging or handshaking recommended. It was a good summit. I don't know when we're going to hold another in-person one, but we're starting to talk about how to do an online walking summit, and learning from events like this one as to how to do that. And we hold a panel discussion series called Walking Towards Justice, in which we address social and racial justice issues and how they intersect with walking and quality of life, walkable, livable neighborhoods. We have one of these coming up next week, and I'm just going to do a little shameless marketing next Wednesday at 11 o'clock Pacific time, Walking Towards Justice in Indian Country. And we're focused on the tragic epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, a shocking phenomenon that doesn't get a lot of airplay and is very much related to transportation system design and other factors. And we're thrilled that we have US Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who represents New Mexico's 1st Congressional District and is the leading voice in the US Congress on this issue, as one of our panelists. So you can register for this at our website, americawalks.org. So I want to move on to talking about near-term strategies. And first of all, make sure you are familiar with this publication, which just came out from the Safe Routes Partnership. Back to School 2020, recommendations for Safe Routes to School programming. Definitely a must-read for all Safe Routes to School programs across the country. Because of all of the uncertainty, the partnership has developed 3 sets of recommendations based on 3 different scenarios, because we don't know what's going to happen. A remote learning scenario, an in-person learning scenario, and a hybrid system. And those recommendations have been worked out in the areas of engagement, equity, engineering, education, encouragement, and evaluation. You'll notice that enforcement is not there. The Safe Routes to School Partnership and other organizations in our sort of transportation reforms, safety planning, and design professions are having, and I'm sure you are too, difficult conversations about the role of policing in our work. My personal opinion is that, and I've only come to this in the last few months, to be honest, is that the institution of American policing is fatally flawed and probably cannot be reformed, and that we need to come up with a new concept that is fully inclusive, particularly of African Americans and all racial minorities, of community safety, and start again. In the meantime, you'll see enforcement is being very much de-emphasized in a lot of communications and from a lot of organizations. And I honestly think that the ease model that has been the norm in Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero is better put to one side, and we should focus on the actual goals of those concepts. So within this guidance, there are a number of specific suggestions. I'm not going to read all those, but you can just run your eyes down them, and obviously they depend on whether it's remote or in person. And there is an overarching sort of approach that I thought was really well written around, managing uncertainties, dismissing the idea of we got to get back to normal, and instead seizing the moment as an opportunity to shape a better future. The idea of trauma-informed engagement is a thread that runs through it, and the importance of remembering how Black, Indigenous, people of color, and people living in low-income communities are so disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, again, as an overarching theme of this guidance. So I think that's a great tool. I want to talk a little bit about Walk to Connect, which is an organization started by Jonathon Stalls, pictured here, which has also come up with some really great guidance around organized walks, and I want to let you know about those. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jonathon, but he walked across America as a sort of a personal journey of spirituality about 10 years ago. And having done that, he developed this concept of walking to connect, and how you can make really authentic connections and solve problems through the act of walking. And set up this organization, Walk to Connect, which is based in Denver, that has created a very unique and successful model of creating sustainable, organized walking groups all across, mostly in Colorado, but some other states, and even there's one in London. And you can see there that the walking movement leaders that they've trained continue to lead walks using their model, and in particular their marketing strategy, which focuses a lot on social media. 2,500 walks were organized as part of the Walk to Connect method. And people participating in these walks were not walking before. This hasn't just become a label. These are new walkers who are now walking, often several times a week in their communities, in their neighborhoods. And there's a sustainability. Now, it has taken a hit, as you might imagine, because of the pandemic, but we'll come to that because they have a sort of a guidance for that. This is an illustration of the different themes and topics that are covered on those walks. And then this is the guidance that I'm referring to. And I'm going to provide at the end a list of the kind of key resources with links, and I'll send this PowerPoint slide deck to Elaine and Cynthia, so you'll have access to all of those. But this is just the infographic, and then there's a sort of a deeper toolkit of how to organize walks in a pandemic, which clearly applies to Safe Routes to School programming as well. So I hadn't initially planned to do that near-term strategies section, but as I was starting to put the presentation together after talking with Elaine a couple of weeks ago, we can't ignore the present moment. It's here, it's going to be with us for a long time, and so we have to embrace it and overcome the challenges. What remains are some case studies from different cities that are part of the long-term process which pre-existed the pandemic, about moving from organizing walking programs to creating walkable communities. So I'm starting with another Walk to Connect infographic here about the benefits of walking. And again, I'm not going to read all this, but just cast your eyes over it. There are so many benefits to having a community where everybody gets out and walks regularly, from children to older adults, that it's surprising that it's not more of a priority for elected officials. I know it is for Gordon and Lane and myself, and there may be other elected officials on this call, in which case I apologize for not calling you out. But unfortunately, mainstream politics largely ignores the benefits to local communities of people walking and making those communities walkable. They address so many different things with a single program. So I'm just going to illustrate some, typical ways that we gather to walk with walk to school days and walking school buses, senior walking groups. Walk with a Doc is a great program. If you're not familiar with that, I recommend you check it out. Medical doctors all over the country are organized to lead walks, talk about, health tips, benefits of walking, and so on, and sort of build that community. These are just a few slides from a hike I did a few years ago with my wife and a group of friends. Walked across England from the west coast to the east coast. What an amazing way to spend 2 weeks. Not too many miles each day, stay in some great places, see some great countryside, and walk every day. I haven't done this walk, but I know people who have. Another thoroughly rewarding experience in Spain, the Camino de Santiago. These are some more Walk to Connect slides here, illustrating some of the themes of walks. You can have art walks. They do a glow-in-the-dark dance walk. You can kind of see the blurry picture. Everybody's dancing there. I participated in one of those. Really great fun. And we do walk audits. And this is where I'm transitioning from walking to walkability. And as I know, many of you know, a walk audit is an evaluation, an assessment of the built environment for walking to identify problems and identify examples of good design to reproduce those in other places. This is an example of particularly bad design in Denver. It's called the Quebec Street Slant, jokingly, and that's Quebec Street going underneath Interstate 70. And on one side of Interstate 70 in this location, there's a public housing development, a lot of immigrant families, and on the other side are hotels and restaurants where a lot of those people work. And this is the commute. So this gives an example of some of the work that needs to be done. These are the brand new, just released a few weeks ago, AARP Community Walk Audit Worksheets. I expect many of you are familiar with the Walk Audit Toolkit and Leader Guide that AARP produced many years ago, which is a substantial book, a great educational tool for leading, for planning and leading and following up on walk audits. But these are kind of handy little one-pagers. And there's also going to be an app-based version of this for your phones. So the Walkability Checklist and the Walk Audit are key tools in moving from walking to walkable communities. And here I just want to let your eyes look over some really great examples of walkability. Keys are to create a calm space without speeding traffic. Traffic can be there, but it just has to be going slowly, and it just has to be kept in its place so that human beings occupy the main space. It must be beautiful. It must have interest. It must have shade if it's in a hot part of the country, and it must have things to walk to and things to do. And if you put all that together throughout a community, you have a walkable community, and people will walk. The data is clear. Build a walkable community, people will walk, and that includes school children. This is the vision of what kids walk to school should look like. So how do we get there? How do we move from walking to walkable communities? And I'm going to wrap up with 3 stories here from around the country of strategies that are really working. So the first one is from the city of St. Louis, and the story is told by Faye Page Edwards, who was a Walking College Fellow in 2015. She is also a local Girl Trek organizer, and Girl Trek, many of you may be familiar with. It's the the subtitle for their organization. They claim they are the largest, I believe, health advocacy organization for African American women and girls. But all of their events are open to everybody, but the leadership consists of African American women and girls, and the programs are designed for African American women and girls. And one of the things they say is that a walk is a radical act of self-care. So this addresses a lot of issues beyond simply walking, but walking is the connection. Oh, here we go. Here's a bit more information about Girl Trek. And Faye came to the Walking College as an existing Girl Trek leader, and was interested in learning more about how to actually change the built environment to make it safer and more appealing for people to walk. And the thing she was concerned about was speeding traffic in the neighborhoods of St. Louis. And this graphic shows the issue that all American cities deal with in terms of speeding traffic and the devastating impact it has on pedestrians. That red line shows the percentage of pedestrians who are killed when hit by a car at each of those speeds. And the orange part is a serious injury. The importance of getting speed down is one of the most important tangible things that we can do, and certainly around schools, but really anywhere where people are going to be walking or biking. So these are some shots showing how she felt, and I agree, that the streets were not well designed for walking and biking. She worked with a local advocacy organization, TrailNet in St. Louis. And the first thing that, as they kind of evaluated the speeding problem in St. Louis neighborhoods, they discovered that there was an existing ordinance in the St. Louis City Code of Ordinances that prohibited traffic calming in neighborhoods. And this had been introduced and enacted many, many decades ago, that nothing can inhibit the free flow of traffic within the city of St. Louis, if you can believe it. So they can put up signs and speed limit signs, which of course we know don't really make a lot of difference if the road is designed for speeding, unless there's a police vehicle actually there measuring people's speeds at the time. So the first thing they had to do was to get that overturned, and they did that. And that was a big part of Faye's Walking College project, to work with TrailNet to advocate with the existing city council. This was back in 2016, and get that ordinance overturned. They did that. And then they started the pop-ups program. This is a great way to inexpensively test out street design changes that reduce the speed of traffic. And because it's temporary and inexpensive, you can really overcome some entrenched opposition, which often comes in if you want to make permanent traffic calming changes. So they tried a lot of different strategies in different neighborhoods, using easily available, inexpensive materials, and in particular engaging school children and other residents of the neighborhoods to design the traffic calming pop-ups. As I mentioned, they covered a variety of different designs, and these were all tested. They were very, very popular within the neighborhoods. And when they surveyed people, they found, how much the residents appreciated the change. And then when they measured traffic speeds before and after, they saw significant reductions in the typical speeds when some of these installations were put in. And as a result of this project, speed humps are now being installed and mini circles and other designs. So that whole pop-ups program has led to permanent change, which is, there's really no opposition to it anymore, even though there was an ordinance prohibiting this kind of thing before 2016. So that's the story from a big city, and I think that story would translate very well in Boise and a lot of other larger cities in Idaho. Let's go to a small rural town now and talk about how streetscape redesign for walkability can not just improve the health of the community, but can also spur economic revitalization. And the key takeaways from this story are that in a lot of small rural towns, car-oriented sprawl have led to the decline of Main Street. Secondly, that small town mayors, Gordon, I don't know if you've ever met Rick Elumbaugh, the mayor of Batesville, who I'm going to talk about, but you two would get along well. I think you have a lot in common. And this story, I could imagine happening in Emmett, and maybe it will. That small town mayors can be very effective champions for this kind of work, and that walkability improvements to the streetscape can catalyze local economic development, something that's so important to small rural towns. So Batesville is a town of about 10,000. It's the oldest living city in the state of Arkansas. It was actually the second city that was incorporated, but the first one went out of existence at some point. So Batesville is the oldest living city. And in 2014, this is what Main Street looked like. It was a one-way street with 2 lanes of traffic, a real speeding problem. The traffic signals every block for about 5 or 6 blocks were synchronized. And I visited at this time, and you would stand on the side of the street and a whole volley of about 10 cars would go speeding through, and then nothing would happen for about 2 or 3 minutes till the cycle of the lights came through again, and then they all went through again. The economic activity was at a very low level, 23 empty retail buildings, and even the ones that were operating really only opened 9 to 5 or maybe 11 to 3. This is the county seat, so it had city government, county government, the county court, and there were people working there during the day. But once the workday ended, everybody went out to the outskirts or to the other communities outside of Batesville, and there was no evening business activity whatever. Here's that catalytic small town mayor I mentioned, Rick Elumbaugh. Prior to becoming mayor, he was the PE teacher for Batesville Public Schools. And one of the things that drove him to run for mayor was that he was so distressed that all of these kids, I think he taught middle school, that he coached, he stayed in contact with them, but they left Batesville and they didn't want to come back because what they were looking for involved recreational opportunities and, evening entertainment and so on. And so he set about running for mayor, was elected in 2007. He's still mayor. I just talked to him the other day, actually. And he has, over this time, consistently made great progress in the small city of Batesville. In the background of that photograph there is the outdoor aquatic recreation center that he led the charge to raise a sales tax to build down by the river in Batesville, and then a trail system connects along the river, connects that area to the downtown area. And then in about 2014, he kind of turned his attention to the downtown area itself and Main Street in particular, and teamed up with this chap, Bob Carius, who was the Main Street, I assume, Elaine, you have Main Street programs all across Idaho, I'm guessing? Yeah, nodding, great. Wonderful, wonderful organization, a great partner for this kind of work. So Bob was a retired Navy admiral, and in his retirement, he became president of Main Street Batesville. And he and Rick kind of were the team that really made a lot of things happen. The first thing they did was convince the local community banks to put up some money to bring Dan Burden in. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dan. If you're not, he's often considered the grandfather of the national walking movement. He's been doing this work earlier than anybody else that I'm aware of. He was doing this in the 80s, going around and helping communities figure out how to make their towns more walkable, and he's still doing it. And I had the privilege of working with him on this project in Batesville in 2014. We did a series of walk audits. It was a snowy, icy couple of days down there in February, I think. We did a lot of community visioning and developed, a real concept of what Main Street could look like, and wrote a plan for the community to implement in a number of different steps. And Dan does this all the time. I actually wrote the plan in this case, but he always lays out these plans. But I don't know if there's many communities that have implemented the plan as well as Batesville did. And they pretty much checked off every one of these items, have done so in the 6 years since that plan was written. The other thing that Dan does, which I think is a great tool and something that other organizations and other communities can use, is take a photograph of a street or a public space as it is now, conduct a visioning process with the residents and make notes on the ideas that they have, which may be stimulated by ideas from other communities, and then use graphic software to create a visual for what that could look like. And so again, Dan does this for all of his projects, but that is the same photograph. If you look at the car in the distance with headlights on, you can see that all that's happened here is that the pavement texture has been improved. The travel lanes have been reduced from 2 through lanes to just 1 through lane. A lot of landscaping has been added and people have been added. There's outdoor seating on the cafe over there and all of these amenities that make a downtown business district, especially in a small rural town, so walkable. So that graphic was sent with the plan back to the mayor and the Main Street president and the whole team there, and they got to work. And very impressively, within about 2 or 3 years, they had entirely recreated the streetscape of about 5 blocks of Main Street, with a lot of landscaping areas, a lot of local fundraising. The vision really helped people open their pocketbook, in addition to some public money that the city put in and some grants. The People's Block there, that was one entire block. And I think each block, it wasn't an enormous fortune. I think each block cost maybe $80,000 or something for the irrigation and landscaping and pavement, restriping and some surface treatments as well. They took out the traffic signals and replaced them with stop signs. They also nurtured some of the public space into, multiple opportunities for usage, a farmer's market here in this empty block, the nearby park by the river on the right was sort of improved, and it's really just adjacent to downtown. And the economic impacts were just dramatic. Sorry, I just need to move this Zoom screen so I can see my slides a little better. I think this was within about 3 years, by about the time that the improvements were finished, the vacancy rate was 0. 21 new businesses had opened, 4 new restaurant buildings were under construction, new loft apartments have been constructed now, so there's people living downtown, which there wasn't before. The old theater, which had been shuttered for decades, was open, and the most recent tax assessment has rated all the property 25% higher than it was. So a remarkable economic turnaround. This is the oldest building in the oldest city in Arkansas. built in 1903, and it had stood empty for a long, long time. But with everything else going on in the downtown area, the county library decided to invest a significant amount of funds to renovate it, bring it back into operation, and move in. The county library had kind of moved out to the edges of town many decades ago, along with everything else. Now they wanted to be back in the center. And here's a little tip. Library districts often have a lot more money than you think they might have. Library taxes are often quite high, and if you can partner with your local library on built environment improvements, it can be really effective. So the library is bringing many, many more people downtown. This all, you know, has a sort of a mutual effect on the businesses and creates this great walkable area. And one of the things that they've observed is that now people who don't live in town and drive in, they park once and then they walk all around because there are a lot of attractions. And then there's all kinds of events going on. I'm just doing a quick time check. I was supposed to finish at about this time, wasn't I, Elaine? Can I have another 5 minutes just to wrap up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. So moving on to the final sort of case study and strategy, Vision Zero. I don't think there are any Vision Zero communities in Idaho, but I would recommend you look at it. Here's another presentation of pedestrian fatalities, increased 60% in the last 10 years across the whole country. These fatalities are disproportionately impacting low-income neighborhoods because those are people that are often walking because they don't have a car, and those are the neighborhoods where the most dangerous roads have been built, often cutting through those neighborhoods. Okay, that graphic seems to have disappeared, so I apologize, but I can tell you that Indigenous and Black people are much more highly impacted by pedestrian fatalities. Oh, there it is. Okay. Than other racial and ethnic groups. And unsurprisingly, older adults are more impacted, as is illustrated here. So each of these graph plots shows the percentage likelihood of being killed when you're hit by a car at different speeds. Each graph represents a different age group, but the important thing to note, and this is similar to the data I showed earlier in relation to the St. Louis example, is that if you can keep traffic speeds down to 30 miles an hour or even 20 miles an hour, those pedestrian fatality risks go way down. And we'll be saving a lot of lives. And not just saving people's lives, but we'll have an environment which is safe for walking, so a lot more people will be willing to walk, especially children who we would like to walk to school on their own or in small groups. But we need the traffic speeds down to do that. These are the kind of roads that we have to redesign in order to create a safe, walkable community. And that's the goal of Vision Zero. The Vision Zero Network is the national organization that sort of convenes the Vision Zero communities. There are about 50 Vision Zero communities, and I would strongly recommend, you know, some of your larger towns, but even there's no reason why Vision Zero shouldn't apply in a small town either. It's a concept, really. It's a vision that we're focused on. So I'm going to quickly tell you the story of Vision Zero in Columbia, Missouri, where I live. It's a college town of about 120,000 residents. We have some wonderful trails, as I was mentioning earlier, but we also have some horrendous, you know, car-oriented commercial districts, which are very unwalkable, and these kind of streets really cut people off from being able to walk to destinations. And then in 2014, I think this was, we had a spate of pedestrian deaths and injuries. 4 people were killed and another 5 or 6 were seriously injured within a span of just about 6 months. I had just joined the council at that time, and I urged the mayor to set up a task force on pedestrian safety, which he agreed to do. And we met for about a year and produced a report and recommendations. And the first recommendation was to adopt a Vision Zero policy. At this time, Vision Zero was just taking off across the country. Good results were seen in New York City, Seattle, San Francisco. And it was very clear to that task force that this was, you know, a best practice was to adopt a Vision Zero policy. So what does a Vision Zero policy say? Well, here's ours, and I'm just going to highlight a few things. It sets a goal of eliminating traffic deaths and serious injuries in your community. At this time in Columbia, there were, and not just pedestrian deaths and injuries, this is all modes of transportation. At this time, about 10 to a dozen people were being killed every year in traffic crashes, and somewhere between 60 and 80 were being seriously injured. And this sets the goal to get those numbers down to zero. The policy asserts that safety is the most important factor. You would think that that already is the case, but it's not. If you look at the way that traffic engineering does its work, moving vehicles as quickly as possible in as short a time as possible from one place to another is the most important factor, and safety is second. So this explicitly demands that safety is first. It asserts that traffic deaths and serious injuries are preventable and therefore ethically unacceptable. And it states that transportation systems should be designed and operated so that if somebody makes a mistake, it's not a fatal error. It's also very important to emphasize equity, especially racial equity in these policies. As I mentioned earlier, enforcement as a strategy is really under scrutiny now, particularly the use of armed police officers to conduct enforcement. We wrote this before that time, but we did emphasize that any enforcement as part of Vision Zero should explicitly disavow racial profiling, and also noted that African Americans are disproportionately impacted by traffic violence. This was the implementation plan that the city manager developed after the city council adopted that policy. This is the strategic plan to achieve that goal of zero deaths and serious injuries by 2030. This was for the first 3 years. And one element was an education component. And this is part of that. This is an interactive website that shows where the fatalities and serious injuries have been over the last 10 years. And the thing to note is there are long filaments of these tragedies on a map, and those are the 4-lane highways going through our city, pretty much. So that's where the efforts have to be focused. There's a policy component, and one policy that the council passed very quickly was a distracted driving ordinance that allows police officers now to ticket people that are seen using their devices whilst driving. And a program of road safety audits on those 4-lane highways to identify improvements. Now, I'll say, I don't think our city public works department has embraced the changes that really need to happen. And we have not really seen a reduction in deaths and serious injuries to date. So I just have some resources left to show, and I'll just go. I've mentioned some of these documents before, and I will send this presentation so that you have all of these links. The AARP Livable Communities pop-up toolkit is a really good one. This is where the data on pedestrian deaths and injury come from. Project for Public Spaces develops community engagement strategies around redesigning places for people. This is a great one, and this is one I would encourage those of you working at the state level to look closely at. It was put together by the Colorado Department of Transportation in partnership with the Colorado Department of Public Health, and it lays out how small towns across Colorado, whose main street is also a state highway, can redesign their main street for multiple purposes beyond moving traffic quickly through. Economic development purposes, community engagement purposes, for safety and health. And it's a model to me for a really great document at the state level. It's something that I think Idaho could put together, a very similar document, which would greatly improve safety and quality of life in your small communities. This is a report by the Vision Zero Network. And my last slides just show some of the work that America Walks does. We facilitate community workshops, train people to do walk audits, help development of Vision Zero policy. We do pop-up workshops. And I've discussed with both Elaine and Cynthia the possibility of an Idaho State Walking College, which would be a state-level version of the Walking College that Cynthia and Gordon both participated in. I'd love to discuss that further. We're doing one in New York State right now. We've done one in Iowa, and it's a model that seems to be quite, sorry I ran over time, but hopefully we'll have some time for some discussion.
Well, thank you, Ian. Really appreciate it. If you want to stop sharing your screen, we could get everybody up so that we can see during Q&A. And if you guys will either raise your hand or unmute or wave, I'll call on you if you have a question. Anybody? Adrian, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you for the information, actually for both of these presentations. It's kind of changed my outlook on some of the planning aspects. So thanks, everybody.
You bet. Thank you for that input. I really appreciate hearing that. Anyone else? Come on, I know you guys aren't shy. I've seen you ask questions before. Sarah.
I put mine in the chat, but I'd love to hear, Ian, do you have a tool that you'd recommend? That really cool picture that you showed where it showed a street and then it showed the street after, you know, some design ideas were added kind of over the top. Is there a tool that you've used or that you'd recommend?
There is a tool called Street Mix, which does something like that, where you can go in and design your own street. But what I showed there was, you know, a pre-existing photograph that a graphic designer who worked part-time with Dan Burden was able to modify. And I believe, I've never met this person, but I believe he's done many of these, that most times Dan goes and does a workshop in a community. He produces one of these graphics. So my assumption is that that designer has a whole library of street elements and, you know, graphics of different textures and landscaping and people walking and interacting and so on, that he then imports using presumably, it's probably not Photoshop anymore, but as I mentioned, even though my initials are IT, I'm not a highly technological person, but I think just a general graphics program and then having those graphical assets that can be added to an existing photograph. And I think the thing that's so powerful about it is it's the same street. He started with a photograph of the street and incrementally added things and taken things away to improve it.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, we've done some very simple ones. Just in Google Maps, believe it or not, you can draw things and then color them in, and so there are lots of different ways to do that if you're interested. I've also used Street Mix. We did that for Soda Springs here. So
Elaine?
Yes.
There was also another really good comment that got brought up in the chat, which was the idea that I think it was Mark that brought it up. I don't know if Mark wants to speak to it, but his comment was, in a recent walk audit survey I was part of, the majority of participants stated the main reason they would not allow their children to walk in the neighborhood was because they thought that children would be abducted. Is this a common reason given for low walkabilities in cities? I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, but I thought it was a really good point because I also have heard that.
I do believe it's a very high-ranking reason that parents don't let their kids walk alone. It's a reason that really speaks to the walking school bus with an adult leader as a great solution. And as Elaine mentioned, I helped organize a large walking school bus program here in Columbia. At one point, we had something like 12 different schools participating, total of about 600 kids participating, and we recruited college students to be those adult leaders. They volunteered their time, although they got classroom credit for it because we worked with the fitness, health and fitness programs to recruit students, and it was very successful. It's not true that child abductions happen frequently. They're extremely rare, but they are obviously tragic when they happen. But I think there's plenty of data to suggest that if we create the kind of safe, walkable communities that we've been talking about, there will be so many eyes on the street, there'll be so many law-abiding, ordinary people out there that it won't be unsafe, and it won't feel unsafe either. So focusing both on encouraging and organizing the walking programs, but changing that environment so that it is safe, it feels safe, and it attracts a lot of other people walking, really will make it safe from that point of view, as well as the traffic safety point of view.
I can add to that. So this last fall, I attended a planning conference there in Twin Falls, and this particular topic was addressed. And it's basically a perception issue. I don't know where this gentleman got his data, but it's just right now, they didn't have Facebook, they didn't have Twitter, they didn't have these sort of things that make it very visible. But according in this convention, they said it's basically just a perception issue. And we just think it's happening more because we hear about it more.
Yeah.
But one person's perception is their reality, even if it may not be somebody else's reality. So if we want parents to, support their children walking to school, potentially without adult supervision, then we have to address that. And it is a perception, and it's not likely to go away, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah. Helen or Gordon, I saw maybe one of you had a question.
Well,
Helen, go ahead.
what I wonder about, I mean, this is a question for both of you, but every time I go to Seattle, I think, why can't we do this? I mean, I see Seattle has all kinds of code about when people put in new buildings, they have this greenscape and they have pollinator strips. I mean, there's just so much happening that's wonderful. And I wonder, I mean, what's happening, in Idaho and that kind of code and register? Because when you mentioned banks, I'm thinking about this new bank that's coming in to our town. It's right on the street to Pullman, so Elaine and Deanna, you know it. Busy, boring. There's no landscaping, but it's a big space. And when you mentioned banks, I thought, I've never thought about working with the banks. I mean, that I thought was a great idea because they occupy a lot of real estate and they have money. And so I'm just curious about this. And I mean, I've tried to work on complete streets. So I have some sense of how ordinances work and trying to get it past city council, but I wondered if some of you on the call have had good success. You have good recommendations for really having a cohesive plan about this.
Well, Elaine, you're on the city council in Boise. I'm sure you are working on some of those things.
Yeah. Well, it is city ordinance largely, and city by city. For the sake of time, I'm going to go to Gordon because I think he has a question too.
It's not so much a question as two comments. First, I see my good friend Pat Richetti, who is a former resident of Lewiston, as I was. We escaped successfully, both of us did. And I think the idea of having a walking college in Idaho would be great, and I have no doubt that Pat would offer up his place for the situs of the event. The comment I have is with regard to why can't we do this? Well, the answer is we can't. But we have to change the culture of the Department of Transportation. We have to change the culture of places like ACHD, who have a certain vision of what highways are all about. And that vision has to do with these monsters that are made of metal and glass and plastic, and that's about it. So until you change that culture, my opinion, I don't think much is going to change. Can we at the local level? Yes, we can. But that's micro change. We need a whole change of how engineers think about transportation in this state. And by the way, Pat has been wearing strange clothing and riding strange looking bikes all over mountains, deserts, whatever, since the 60s. And that's how he lost all of his hair.
All right.
You're absolutely right, Gordon. The culture of transportation planning and design has to change. I will argue it is changing. In the 20 years or so that I've been working in this, I have seen significant changes. And I mentioned the St. Louis Walking Summit. This is the state I live in and have lived for 20 years. I have been clashing with the Missouri Department of Transportation for that entire 20 years. But it is not really clashing anymore. And they facilitated a session at our National Walking Summit in St. Louis in March in partnership with the statewide disabilities advocacy organization, in which they talked about the federal injunction or Department of Justice injunction that was brought against the Missouri Department of Transportation I think it was in the mid 2000s, because they weren't designing, access ramps. They weren't putting them in at all. They were refusing to do it, even though it was federally required. And they were forced to create an ADA transition plan, and they have done that. And in that presentation, the DOT engineer very explicitly acknowledged and apologized on behalf of his department for the way they previously operated. And they're very much on a trajectory now to work with pedestrian, bicycle, and disability groups to really create complete streets. So I think it's happening all over the country. I'm sure it's happening in the Idaho Department of Transportation as well. And it just takes more consistent advocacy.
Well, we are about out of time in this section. Erin, did you have something quick you wanted to ask?
Well, I just wanted to know if you have any specific tips on who our most effective advocates are, because we've been working for a long time. A lot of people on this call have been working with the Department of Transportation to get some advocacy for funding for these projects in the state legislature. But we've been changing things, but we're not quite where we want to be yet, obviously. But would it be more effective to have the local grassroots people? Is it city council and mayors at that level to bring them to the state legislature? Or do you see success specifically in one area versus another?
I've talked with Elaine quite a bit about the Idaho Department, and Cynthia about the Idaho Department of Transportation. We even had a sort of a discussion group going for a while, a year or two ago, which included representatives from both the Idaho Department of Health and Department of Transportation. And I know the legislature has been very unsupportive of any changes to the way that, transportation does its work. I mean, I always support working on multiple fronts, but I think probably the likely best return on investment, where the investment is in terms of, advocacy, energy, and effort, including funding for programs and campaigns and so on, is probably to do it at the local level. And the single thing I would recommend, that I do recommend right now, is start adopting Vision Zero policies in your communities. It was a very surprisingly easy campaign for me in Columbia in 2014, 15, 16. When you, apply it to all modes of transportation. I mean, we don't want people dying in car crashes. And it's the same problem that's causing people to die in car crashes as it is that's causing pedestrians to die in car crashes and creating non-walkable, non-livable, unsafe roads and communities. So it speaks to everybody. And when you set that goal and the public stands up and says, yes, of course we should try to have 0 deaths and serious injuries in our city. And then the city council unanimously votes to set that goal and direct the professional staff in traffic engineering and and policy development and communications to make that happen, they've got a very specific, task to perform. And in many cities that adopted Vision Zero policy, great progress has been made, and it generally requires the engineering pieces. The roads have to be redesigned to physically cause drivers to slow down. So that's the strategy. And as far as who are the advocates, the banks were incredibly helpful in Batesville because they were 2 community-owned banks, locally owned. If you have local banks, then they care about the community. They've been in the community for 100 years probably or more. And they want to invest, and they probably share the very same vision that you all have for the future of the community. But AARP is an incredible partner. There are millions of AARP members in every state. Maybe not Idaho, I'm not sure what the total population, but it's a significant proportion of the over 50 population in America. And they want livable communities and age-friendly communities for older adults. And then the Safe Routes to School is a really powerful advocacy, movement as well, pointing out the incredible benefits of kids being able to walk and bike to school, and the fact that this does happen in communities that have been designed correctly or have been retrofitted to create safe, engaging streetscapes and routes for kids to walk and bike to school.